So, my name's Aaron, and if any time throughout this you feel like you have any questions, feel free to ask. So that we need to explain something a little better, something that might not understand. That's quite all right. We're going to go over a couple different things. First, the characteristics of propane.
Hey Nick, she's going to film that, so could you...
What of it is, some of what it is.
She's recording.
And also the hazards associated with handling propane. We're also going to go over the pre-fill inspection of a cylinder and the pre-fill inspection of a tank before you would fill. Typically you won't have to worry about that, but there are signs of things you got to watch for with the propane tank. And then the procedures of filling the propane tank so that you do it in a safe way that minimizes any freezer burns or any risk to you. And also not overfilling the cylinder. So we'll talk a little bit about all of that. So just to kind of start off simply about propane itself, it is non-toxic and naturally is odorless, but they put an additive inside propane called ethyl mercaptan, and that's what gives it that stinky smell that you smell sometimes. And if you were to look at a clear tank of propane, it would look exactly like this on the inside. It looks just like water. It's a clear liquid inside there. And many of the characteristics from propane are actually very similar to water. If you've ever used a pressure cooker at home, and it's got that little weep hole on the top, and it's got the clamps that hold it, well, that's how the pressure cooker works. Like a propane bottle has pressure behind it. When you open the little weep hole on the pressure cooker, it's relieving pressure, steam, in the form of steam coming out of the bottle. And what's happening is the water's boiling to rebuild the pressure that's being lost inside there, and that's why after a little while doing that, your water level is less inside the pressure cooker. Propane works the same way. When kept under pressure, the liquid level stays the same, but if you relieve the pressure by opening the bleeder on the top of the tank, it's releasing pressure, and the propane will start to boil to rebuild the pressure. Now, the temperature of propane greatly affects the pressure, the liquid temperature on the inside. So if you're not using it, if this bottle was sitting here full, propane liquid temperature would actually be the same temperature it is outside the bottle. It absorbs the heat from the outside, and it's the same. So if it's 80 degrees outside right now, it'll be 80 degrees on the inside of the propane bottle. I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you're filling, it feels really cold when it touches your skin. Well, that's because once it starts boiling, it starts boiling to its boiling point, which is negative 44 degrees. So it actually starts getting colder as it's trying to rebuild the pressure to relieve what's being lost. And that's where the first hazard comes in. The first hazard being you can get freezer burns. The fact that it's boiling at such a cold rate and it touches your skin. So what do you do if you get a freezer burn? Just in general, does anybody how do you treat a regular burn?
With just cold water, I would think, right? Cold water.
You don't want cold or you don't want hot. You want to use lukewarm water. And if you can, you take a towel, get it wet, and you wrap it to make it stay where it's where it'll heal a little better. And then from that point, you determine whether you need medical assistance. Well, you treat the freezer burn the same way. You would take something, if you can use lukewarm water, and then get a towel and wrap it. And in most cases, if it's a slight burn, there's going to be hardly anything. But you would still need to let someone know, obviously, that you got a freezer burn or whatever. But in most cases, you don't need to have extra medical attention. But that's the first hazard. Of course, can anybody guess what the second hazard with propane is? Explosion. So that is where it's different than water. It is a flammable gas when it vaporizes into its vapor form. So that's what we call a liquid space and a vapor space. The vapor is actually what ignites, not liquid. So if you had liquid going out, there has to be three things that will create fire: oxygen, heat, the ignition source, and the fuel, which is propane. So what happens is this liquid will rapidly expand, like in the form of that cold vapor that you see, until it reaches the right air mixture, and then will blow. So with those dangers in mind, you have to be aware of your surroundings while you're filling. When you back up your forklift to say this point and you pull out the hose and you hook up, you need to look about 15 feet around you. I don't know if you guys have a different standard for Calbag, but 15 feet around you for any potential sources of ignition. That includes cell phones and other forklifts maybe backing up right next to you. In most cases, you could just close the bleeder for a second until they get in a position if they're pulling next to you. But just be aware that potential sources of ignition exist at all times around you. And you want to turn the key on your forklift to the off position. You don't want your electronics on your dash to be going, because they likewise can be a source of ignition. So propane will always find the lowest point. If there was any trapped areas, it could actually cool up in a low spot. You don't really have that here, but you do have to watch if there's any excessive amount that it could go down the other. You don't know what's on the other side of that hill. There could be the situation we're having homeless. There could be somebody sleeping down there. Maybe they're smoking. You got to just kind of be aware of whatever's around you in these cases. But that's the basic of the actual propane itself. Any questions on its operation? I wish I had a little vial of it. I used to have a vial to show it. It would show how it actually functions when you open the bleeder. But maybe that'll be a future training one day. So that's the propane itself. Now we're going to consider the cylinder. What you're looking for on the actual cylinder as far as damage. If you were to look at the outside of the tank, you would look for anything that was more than 1/4 of an inch dents in the tank. And if there was any dents in the welds of the tank or any breaks in the welds, that would automatically disqualify the tank from being filled, because any of the welds are the structural part of the tank, as many of you are probably already well aware. So you don't want to have any damage there. If it's outside the weld, if it's more than 1/4 of an inch, disqualify it. Looking at the bottom of the tank, as long as the tank's able to stand and the weld's not broke on the foot ring, the tank's still considered in good condition. Same thing with the weld on the ring of the tank. And in this case, I kind of have this like this on purpose. You see that valve is not protected. The valves are supposed to be turned in a position where they're inside the collar, so that if something were to hit it, it wouldn't hit the valve and snap it off. So that's part of the pre-fill inspection as far as the cylinders. Every valve has threads going into the tank. If you start to see a oily residue build up on the outside of any of the threads, that's an indicator that you have a slight leak going on around the threads of the tank. So you would want to not fill the tank, go ahead and run it out on your forklift or whatever, and then let your supervisor know, which will let me know, because I can fix cylinders. In fact, I have a hose or a cylinder holder there and all the tools. I can usually fix stuff if the tank's empty right there on the spot. So if you could drain it out for me, I can fix it. But that's the sign of a leak. Around the thread, you see that oily residue. And then, in which case, after that, I'll spray it down with a leak detector bottle and see if it has a bigger leak. The way a fill valve works, how many has filled tanks before? Has pretty much everybody in the class filled? So the way the fill valve works is when you start pushing in, there's a back check at the bottom, a little spring. Thought it was easier to push in. That checks it back to keep it from coming out. Sometimes, I don't know if it's happened to you, but if you're hooked up and you're starting to fill and gas is going in and then you close it and you want to disconnect it, for some reason it's not stopping, it's just still coming out. What happens is that back check sometimes will either get cockeyed or a piece of debris will be in the midst of it and will not release so that you can disconnect. Most cases, you could just put another shot of propane, retighten it back down, put another shot of propane into the tank. It'll usually clear it or straighten it out so that it'll work. But you never want to disconnect completely if all the pressure has not been bled out from it. So just keep that in mind. Also, you want to make sure that it has a gasket so that when you tighten it down, and that the gasket is in a good condition as well. And it's not cracked, seeing a bunch of chunks out of it. If you were to push on it with your fingernail, it needs to have that spongy, rubbery feeling that a gasket has. And that pretty much is the pre-fill inspection of as far as the external portion. But now when talking about filling and overfilling, let me borrow your spot here real quick. I'm gonna mess you up. When you look inside of a cylinder, this is the float gauge, okay? This is the liquid tube on the inside. It goes down to the bottom of the tank and then has a little angle so that when it's on its side, it'll still draw from the bottom. When we look at the liquid level, that's what your forklift draws from. It draws from the bottom of the tank and pulls liquid directly to your forklift. And that's why when you lay it down, this tube with this angle on the bottom will still pull it from the bottom of the tank and draw that liquid up. When you're filling the tank, as it's getting up to its 80% level, because we fill the tanks only to 80 to allow room for expansion. When you fill it, on the inside of the tank, there's this little tube here. I don't know if you can see it. This little tube, it's called the dip tube. That's where you crack that bleeder on the top. And as you're filling it, the liquid level will hit the bottom of that dip tube and start spitting liquid out. That tells you when it's filled to the proper level. Now some will say, well, when do you shut it off? You know, I see liquid. The ideal liquid level when you're filling it is when you hit it and you shut it off, your liquid should actually be going liquid and vapor. Liquid and then vapor. If you have a solid stream of liquid coming out of your forklift, well, that probably means it got overfilled. Now, does it mean it's overfilled? If you were to unclamp it from your forklift and just tip it up and back down to level, then as long as it started doing that liquid to vapor, you're okay. As long as you see vapor at some point. But if you did that and all you saw was liquid, even with a little bit of sloshing, then at that point the tank's overfilled. Not a huge deal for forklift operations because you're drawing liquid, so as you're running it, you're using the liquid up. More of a danger for vapor operations if you're running torches and heaters and stuff like that. But it's always best to, if you think that it is overfilled, to drain it to the proper level before using it. And obviously you don't want to do that here too much, so you might want to call me and have it drained unless you think you can get it out just by running it. But that's where you get into, how overfilled is it. So in most cases it won't be overfilled as soon as you turn it off because you see liquid. Nothing to worry about. Plus, you see that tube, it goes down to that 80% level. When you have your forklift, when you have your tank on the forklift, and you have your relief valve at the 12 o'clock position, where's that tube now? It's now at the 80% level when it's laying down. So that's what allows you to be able to fill it when it's laying down. That puts it at the right level, as long as the relief valve is at the 12 o'clock position. That always has to be there though. You feel like this, your relief valve is now in the liquid space. If it were to discharge, you're shooting liquid out and not vapor. So you have that relief valve at the 12 o'clock. If it were to discharge, it'll discharge vapor and not liquid. So it's always important to make sure that your relief valve, like on this forklift, the relief valve is pretty much at the 12 o'clock position. It's like 12:30, which is still acceptable. So, but that's what you want to look for. Relief valves at the upper position right there. So that's a brief summary of the visual inspection. There is one other thing that typically you won't have to worry about because you have a lot of leased forklifts. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to do a check on some, but it's the date of the tank. So from the manufacture date, the tank needs to be recertified after 12 years. After it's been recertified, it's good for every 5. And the date on DOT forklifts, like right here, this one says 9 of 85. That means this tank would have needed to be recertified 12 years from 1985, September of 1985. So in 97, this tank would have been recertified. Obviously, I haven't needed to recertify this one because I haven't used it. But that's the date, and that's pretty much all you would have to worry about as far as checking out the tank. You probably don't disconnect very often, but if you ever need gaskets for the inside of where you hook up the coupling, I can provide those, but you don't usually have to unhook, so they don't usually go bad. Any questions on the pre-fill inspection? That cover pretty much the basics of that? So then we're going to shift our attention now to the tank inspection. It's almost the same thing as our pre-fill inspection here. You don't have to worry about a lot, but you just, as long as you don't see any visible signs of any leaking on the tank, then you should be just fine. I mean, visible signs, I'm not talking about the oily residue. That is a sign sometimes, but usually we'll catch that because we're here often enough. If you see any like liquid misting from one of the hoses or something, now obviously you need to give us a call. We need to come get that fixed. If you do see any signs of any leaking, there are certain points you could shut off. Like if there was a leak here, you could shut it off right here, and then pull the emergency shut off down here, which is right here, by the way. Give that a pull, and it shuts the valve off underneath the tank there, and that will shut any extra flow off. Although you might pull that and you'll be like, well, why is this still bleeding? Well, you got to remember, everything in there is still charged even when you pull this, so there will still be that liquid in there that's got to escape before it stops. So you might even see it bleed for an hour or two if it's a small leak. So just keep that in mind. Also, if you ever see on the hose itself, and I don't know if anybody's ever noticed, if it's raining, pouring rain out, you might actually from the hose see little bubbles sometimes. Little teeny tiny bubbles. Nothing white, nothing liquid looking. But these hoses all throughout it are actually built in with little relief holes all throughout the hose. And it's designed to relieve pressure if there's overpressurization inside the hose, so that the hose doesn't burst on you. So there's actually little relief valves inside the hose to keep that from happening. So if you see a little bubbling, it's fine. If you see white liquid, like propane is coming out, liquid propane, then close the valves, give us a call, we'll come out and replace the hose. So as far as the valve, pretty much the same concept as what you guys have been using, except you'll notice that there's no bleeder hose on this. And we're actually going to replace this valve in the next week with something new that the city of Portland's starting to use more, is low emission valves. It'll actually be at a 90-degree angle and doesn't have an option for this. And it actually has a back check so that all that's bled out is between right here on your forklift coupling to about right here. And that's all that's bled out. So it should be all it is, like a psst, and then that's it, instead of the whole full bore that you hear coming out of it. But the same concepts though that we talked about earlier is if you start to disconnect and it's continuously coming out, that means that back check's not closing, so you don't want to disconnect in that case. What happens is, as long as it's sealed right here, everything will stay sealed. As soon as you start backing off, say about 1/8 of an inch or so, there's a weep hole on the side of this fill valve. That is what bleeds out the pressure between. So as soon as you disconnect a little bit, it goes away from that gasket and bleeds it out there. So just keep in mind though, if there's still pressure, don't disconnect all the way. Just give it a slight turn to relieve the pressure, and then you can disconnect. So now, sometimes the big question is, what are the procedures, for filling? Some might say, do I turn the pump on? Is it okay to turn it on right away? Do I have to connect and have everything open before I turn the pump on? Propane is actually a very forgiving system on this step because there's built-in bypasses on the pump. So if you did, say, turn the pump on before you have the hose open, the bypass will allow you to continue to do it. But for the matter of safety, it's always better to hook up first to the tank, wearing liquid-proof gloves if possible. And I do make these available if you guys ever need it. And we're actually going to keep them under the hood here so they'll stay drier in the winter and the rainy season.
So please don't take them in the winter when you're cold.
Yeah. Plus they're not that comfortable, so I don't think you'd want to anyway. But when you hook up, you'll make sure it's nice and snug on the hookup, and then you'll want to open the valve. I can't do it right now because everything's open, right? You just come right out on me. But you open the valve before you turn the pump on. The reason being is you want to make sure there's no leaks here. You can hear for leaks. this way when you hook up. And as long as you've done that, there's no leaks. You come over here, flip the pump on, and you're good to go. At that point, you open the bleeder valve on your tank, and you're filling, and as soon as you see that white mist stream come out, shut this off. Then you'll say, well, I'm going to shut this pump off first. First thing you want to do as soon as the tank's full, stop the flow. So that's why you shut this off first. Then go over here, shut the pump off, and then close your bleeder and then do the disconnect procedure, which, like I mentioned, you barely crack it. You let that little weep hole out of the fill valve relieve the pressure, and then disconnect all the way. But if you continuously have pressure, what do you not do?
Just retighten.
Retighten it if you can't get it to stop. But you don't
disconnect. Right?
Don't disconnect all the way. Exactly. Yeah. So
what safety features are on the hose? Because it's happened here before. Somebody inadvertently has it hooked up and they decide to drive away. They were thinking about the weekend and they forgot about the hose that was connected to their tank.
That would happen.
What would happen? It's never happened here before. I'm just bringing it up. It's just a
Did it happen
hypothetical.
before?
you see this swivel down here at the bottom of the hose? There's a disconnect feature that has a back check on both sides, so that if somebody was to pull away with the hose connected, it'll yank that out and stop the flow of product from going any direction. So
you got a safety relief valve then.
yeah, a safety
Safety
back
cl-
check
back
is what they
check.
call it. Back check is what they call it. But yeah, that way, if there's any pullaways, you don't have an uncontrolled release popping out on you. Thank you for pointing that one out.
Now on that that valve that you put in there, to close it up, to open it up is to open
Yeah, to open it is
and close.
yeah, exactly. And on this one, in fact, I can't remember if on the forklift one, I think you can open it without it hooked up and it won't come out. I know on the reseller version it won't. But
That's a closed position right now.
this is closed position. There's a little locking handle that pulls out and you pull up.
Oh, that's a different from the old
If you
one.
want to, we could back up a forklift and
Here, I
demonstrate
need to
it.
get some propane in this one.
Remind-
Okay.
One thing before you do that, just a reminder on this tank, we have an electric emergency shutoff. If you can't get to this valve and you're running, that's the shutoff. It kills everything, power, everything. Right there it says
red
propane
button.
emergency shutoff.
The red button.
Right on that blue tank. Well, if that thing blows up, you'll be getting in the back.
What's that?
So you might as well shut it off and stay where we're going.
Hey, get out of the way. That's good.
Forks down.
Out of curiosity, do we have power yet or is it?
What's that?
Do we have power yet or is it still? We do? Okay.
Right now.
Okay.
We're gonna test it.
I guess so. So again, you did your pre-fill inspection, you checked your tank out. This one has a recertification date on it. And on this one, you actually see on the sticker, it has the letter E afterwards. That means this was visually inspected and so it was good for 5 years from that date. So,
Even though
some-
it looks a little worse for wear.
it looks a little worse. One of the other things that you could look at is it has rust, but is the rust pitting? So is the rust pitting? You know how rust gets bad and it starts corroding? Well, if there's deep pitting on tanks, that could also disqualify the tank from being filled.
The good news is we have new tanks coming for 2610, so that one's gonna go bye-bye.
Yeah, that rack too, right?
The nice shiny ones.
Yeah, yep. And we're bringing those, right? That's from my understanding. Okay. Yeah. So you take the hose, you connect it up, you make sure it's nice and secure.
Oh, they did? I didn't even know
And then to open it, like we were talking about a minute ago, you pull the little lever. And you notice I don't have any leaks. That's the first thing I'm looking for. The relief valve's at 12 o'clock position, so that means when I open the bleeder, it's at the right spot for filling. So I just give it a little crack about like that until I start the pump up. Which I don't know if everything's...
Pull the relief valve first.
Well, theoretically, everything should be good to go.
There you go.
So you're just monitoring the filling process. You don't have to open your bleeder too much to see the liquid. I'm gonna pause here though. One question some people have is the tank's not full and I'm seeing white liquid come out. Does that mean my tank's full? I don't know have you seen some of those on your tanks?
Yeah.
If you're filling, you have it cracked, and you're filling and then you stop and that light mist goes away, that means the tank's not full. If you stop it and then you see liquid coming out, that means the tank is full. What happens is moisture sometimes is in the tank and it's causing that mist to prematurely come out when it's filling. So that moisture will give you a false sense of the tank being full. But if you close this and there's still liquid, then that means the tank's full. If you close it and there's no liquid, then it was just a moisture thing. All right, so we're...
So you're supposed to open your valve here.
Yeah.
Is that part of the test?
Yeah, that was, yeah, thank you. You passed, Greg. You're going to come out and fill everybody. Nobody else got it. Okay, so now I see the liquid. This is the first thing I close because I want to stop the flow. And like I said, the steps are actually pretty forgiving, what you do, because it's got its bypass. But the main thing is you want to close this first because you want to stop the filling process. You don't want an overfilled tank. But it's not a huge deal if you get it a little heavy on the full side because you guys operate throughout the day.
You have to have this one open when you're filling up?
Now that's what I was gonna. So on the new nozzle, you guys are gonna have the low emissions. This option will not be here. You won't have it. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna crack it open like that. Now this looks like a lot, but on the low emissions, it's gonna be a lot less than that. So, but you saw how I did it. I just barely cracked it until it stopped pressure. Once it stopped pressure, you can go the rest of the way, just like that. So, any questions on that? After that, you just hang it up so that it's a safe spot. Now, as was pointed out about the emergency shutoff, if you do have a problem, this is the best place to close the liquid flow of a leak. If you run and shut the electrical shutoff over there, it doesn't shut off a liquid flow. So if at all possible, pull this if you can, if you have a leak. If you have a huge leak, I mean it's uncontrollable and you can't get to this, then the best thing to do is hit that one if you can and get away from the danger as soon as possible. And then take whatever, call 911 or whatever immediate procedures you guys have in place for taking care of stuff like that. But yeah, so now if you look at the bottom of the tank here and you give this a pull, over here at this valve, it pulls on that little lever and that lever comes up. Now let's say if you accidentally trip it, you'll have to know how to reset that lever so that you can keep pumping. Sometimes I get out of gas calls, hey, it's not pumping anymore. Well, maybe that accidentally got tripped without somebody realizing it. So what you have to do to reset it is you grab this little bar right here. Can everybody see that? And you pull it back to this little hook. And then that opens the valve back up right here. So you pull it back, and that resets it back into place. So
by pulling it, it's pulling the cable and releasing the...
Yeah, and you're
pin.
stopping the flow so that no more liquid can come out. You still have liquid in the line that'll bleed, but everything else will be squared away. Yeah. Any questions on... You have anything to add, Greg?
Yeah, a couple things. One is the hose, if it's not on the forklift, it's in the box. It's not laying on the ground, it's not laying on the concrete, because that protects the head, keeps it in good operating condition. Hose isn't getting scuffed up or ran over. The other thing is we don't want to bump the blocks. That's our barrier. So those can take a pretty good hit, but if somebody bumps those, you need to get them back into position and make sure those are there, keep that distance.
Yep, and code is at least minimum 3 feet from the tank. Just kind of keep that in mind. It also is important to keep in mind, I guess, too, when you are carrying the hose, don't carry it by the handle. Either carry it by the valve or everywhere else. But that way, no uncontrolled release will come out if it were to accidentally open. So. I think that's about all I have.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.